Everybody, I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is Wise Girl for Tuesday, January 17th, and I hope everybody's work week is off to a great start. You're probably going to watch this not in the car on the way to work on your commute, but perhaps later on when you have a little break from work, which is great. And of course, always I accept willingly and enthusiastically all of your feedback. I wanted to talk about two things today. One is othering versus brothering, and the other one is a little bit about letting go versus sort of, what it means to be in the mystery of letting go, as opposed to trying to have control over situations that, frankly, we may not very easily have control over. So the first thing is othering versus brothering. This is something that came to mind when I was thinking about Dr. Martin Luther King yesterday, and how really one of our main, I think, causes of affliction is about the fact that we often see ourselves as isolated, or we see ourselves as separate or different, and we see there's a real separation. We feel as though there's a real separation between us and other people, or us and other things. So we don't see ourselves as part of a continuum in terms of animals and plants or the planet. We certainly can see a real sense of tribalism in terms of differences between ourselves and people who don't necessarily look like us, meaning they may be of a different race, they may be of a different body type, they may come from a different socioeconomic class, whatever variety of differences we may have, a different country, speak a different language, perhaps have a different religion. And that this idea of othering can be really detrimental, not only to the people that we don't see as part of our own sort of ecosystem, but the fact that we then can't really rely on this sort of sense of community and interdependence that in fact is the reality of human life. None of us can exist without the people around us, whether or not we realize we depend on them or not. For example, there's a sanitation truck that's going by right now, sweeping the streets in my neighborhood. And, the reason that I'm able to do some of the things that I'm able to do is because they do some of the things that they're able to do. So it's an interdependent system. So if I had some kind of judgment or idea about, who that person is in the truck and how they may or may not be whatever, connected to me at some level. And God forbid I have some kind of hierarchical notion as to who is better in that scenario for whatever reason. It could be that they're better because they have a secure union position. It could be that I'm better because I went to a certain school. I don't even know. But we come up with these judgments or ideas in our head that aren't really founded in anything and really just force us into a sense of separateness as opposed to into that sense of connection and interdependence that's ever changing, ever moving, and ever sort of evolving as we go. Which is why it's important to remain open-minded and open-hearted. And so that gets into this idea of control versus letting go into the mystery. This idea of not necessarily knowing what's going to happen, but maintaining a real curiosity and a real openness about what it is that might happen, and then being able to really trust our own inner wisdom insofar as being able to then negotiate an appropriate response to whatever it is that comes up, as opposed to coming from sort of a fearful place where we want to pre-know, that's just something I invented, something that hasn't happened. Because really, how is that even possible? We are not the predictors. We have no crystal ball. There is no way of being able to really take hold and say, this is what's going to happen, and then this is what's going to happen. And in fact, if we knew that, of course, we would get paid $1 million a minute or something, right? But what we can know and what we can feel, the more that we get in touch with our own sensations, our bodily sensations, what triggers us and what doesn't, the more space that we're able to create within ourselves through processes like meditation or taking long walks in nature or quiet time away from the phone or the computer or family or kids or anything, but just taking a little bit of time to center and focus ourselves, again, without judgment, the more space that we can then create and settle into ourselves with, then the more able we are to relax into a sense of letting go as opposed to a real control and attempts at pre-knowing, which are futile, quite frankly. So it takes a couple of, different sort of skill sets to be able to do that. And a couple of different sort of foundational ideas or practices that may be helpful, which I always go back to. One is that the core of who you are, meaning that you are, I am, any being really is sort of this blank slate, right? It is this, you can call it true nature. You can call it pure awareness. You can call it consciousness. You can call it spirit. You could call it any number of things. But that this core nature of who you are is not the same as the conditioning that has shaped your ego and your personality. That is somehow the things that have been done to you, the result of the decisions that you've made, the titles that you may have as a mother or father or marketer or CEO or sanitation worker or poet or whatever, that all of these things are not you, that you are also not just your trauma, just your pain, although that often feels like it because we are often really stuck in a contracted state of trying to protect ourselves in whatever way. Sometimes we abuse food, sometimes alcohol, sometimes people, sometimes we internalize it and we get depressed. All of these things can be coping mechanisms that we learn as a child, and they contract us around the true nature of who we really are. But when we realize that we are beyond that as well, meaning we're not just that tightened conditioning survival mechanism, and we're also not just this sort of like pompous idea of like, well, I'm the CEO or I'm the mom or I'm the whatever, right? When we open up more space around who we think we are, when we relax the control, when we're able to open up a little bit more toward the not knowing and the mystery, meaning what's life going to bring me today? What can I be curious about? How can I put in my efforts towards something that I believe in, which means having the right sort of open-mindedness to craft an intention of, say, kindness for the day. That you go back to this core nature of your own goodness, and out of that comes your kindness, comes your openness, comes your curiosity. You relax that control and that pre-knowing attempt. You trust in this core nature of who you really are, this deeper part of yourself that's your inner wisdom. You learn to trust in that. You continue to listen and get feedback as all of these activities of this egocentric person that are very much operational in the day-to-day world that we have to live in, but you don't assume that they are the totality of who you are. Then there's more of an interplay, right? It's kind of like a ball bearing where you work with both parts on a regular basis. Because when we cling to this part of the ego personality, we see everything else as other than. Back to the original point. We don't really see it as a connection because we ourselves aren't connected to ourselves. Because we think that this part, the ego part, is all of who we are. When in fact, our core part, our true nature, our pure awareness, our basic level of being, which is much more spacious, much more receptive, much more open than any kind of title like soccer mom or, writer or gym rat or whatever could ever be. When we go back to that, it's so much more expansive, and it doesn't see in duality. It doesn't see, we don't see in terms of us versus them, you versus me, black versus white. We rest in a little bit more ambiguity. And the only way to really be able to feel any comfort whatsoever in that ambiguity and not get overly anxious because we want to pre-know and not get too stuck in ruminating about the past in terms of poor decisions that we're judging as poor decisions that we may have made in the past, or obsessing about things that have happened to us in the past that we really wish we could undo or unhook from. Well, we can unhook, actually, but the foundation is knowing that at a core basis, there's something much deeper than just this personality of us that's running around trying to do all this stuff that feels very much like we continue to be running after, running toward, stumbling into the future of stuff, as opposed to resting in the present moment. So as we rest in the present moment and we recognize that we can, in fact, stay open to the mystery, as opposed to rumination about the past and some attempt at pre-knowing the future, which is of course impossible, we can then really sort of take on a new way of seeing how things really are. And that's what we're really trying to do, is clearing out the cobwebs, the dust of the mirror, the junk in the attic of our lives, which is often the conditioning that crowds us into thinking that we're stuck, when in fact, if we can unhook that, we can then create more space and see people as people, not as some external construction of whoever they might be, or we perceive them to be through our own projections and our own conditioning. We're able to then open up to not this idea of othering, but rather this more inclusive idea of brothering, right? That everybody's really kind of like our brothers and sisters, regardless of who they are. And yet we also have to be mindful of the smothering aspects of it, right? Or the over-mothering aspects, meaning we don't want to get locked in and enmeshed with everyone. That's where equanimity, balance, wisdom come into play. That's where that inner trust within ourselves, in terms of really kind of getting to know, what are our own boundaries? Is it okay to have boundaries? Is it okay to be able to say no to people at certain times, so that we can say yes to other situations when it's really where and how we're able to give from our full heart, without depleting ourselves, but instead coming from a full well, a full reservoir of energy. That takes wisdom. So we don't want to smother or mother, and we also don't want to other. We want a brother. We want to tend and befriend not only ourselves, but those around us, because then it comes back. And then it becomes part of the energy that we fill our own well with, and that we're able to then kind of recycle going forward. So it's all kind of predicated on this idea that we are not the know-it-alls, right? And we never will be. This idea of grasping toward the knowing. There's a certain amount of knowing, say, you may need to know if you're going to become a physician, because you're going to be taking care of bodies, and you need to make sure that you don't confuse the liver with the lungs. I get it. And at the same time, there's a certain sort of existential, if you will, mystery in terms of life and creation in the universe that isn't just about us. And we may not feel it immediately. We may not even believe it immediately. We may not even want to acknowledge it immediately. We may be nihilists, we may be atheists, we may be whatever. It doesn't matter, right? Like, this is an all-inclusive situation. If you look at Newtonian physics, it'll tell you that everything is all about little separate particles. So if you're a science geek and you want to go that way, that's fine. We are the same as the cosmos. We're all these little changing particles all the time. And then if you want to look at it from the more spiritual perspective of having a spirit or a soul, or having this greater energy that's connected throughout the universe, that's fine too. It doesn't matter. It's a one-size-fits-all policy, so to speak. But the idea being is that we're not separate and that we cannot know everything, and that we will find peace within ourselves the more that we're able to let go slowly of our attempts to know or to control or to grasp or to pre-know. And the more that we're able to kind of come into ourselves and just say, I'm noticing this. I'm noticing that. I'm curious about this. Let me ask someone. Let me ask the other person. Let me not make assumptions. Let me replenish my well so that I'm coming from a place of abundance and not burnout. Let me consider smiling at that person on the subway or on the street or at lunch. Let me see what it feels like when I am at the checkout counter, and instead of looking through the person or playing with my phone or reading an Inquirer magazine, I actually look at the checkout person and I say, hi, how are you? How's your day? You know, is it going to kill us? Probably not. Who doesn't want to be happy? Nobody. It's the one thing we all share. So to the extent that we're able to befriend ourselves and allow ourselves a little bit of happiness and a little bit of contentment within ourselves, and that we can generate that for ourselves, then we're also able to kind of extend that. And the more community we create in doing that, the general sort of sense of what is abundant around us becomes more of what we attract and what we generate and what we grow. So it's sort of like a snowball. It gathers momentum as we go along. So those are some of the things that I would invite you to consider today. I am off and running. I'm Francesca Maxime. This is Wise Girl. Find me on social media. Ask me questions. Let me know what's going on in your life. I'm curious. And if there's any topics that you would like to see covered either live or in some other fashion, let me know. Okay, take care. Have a great day. Bye.